In this video, I'm going to talk about the Claw, which is MSI's very first handheld device. And the main thing that sets this Claw apart from other handheld devices on the market is that it uses an Intel CPU combined with Intel Arc graphics. So it created a lot of hype when it was presented to us at CES at the beginning of the year. But then MSI went pretty quiet until it started showing up in shops last month. And the first reviews from people that bought it were kind of mixed. Now, I was able to borrow one and I used it for the last few weeks or so, which is not really enough to do a proper full review, but I definitely have some thoughts that I would like to share with you guys. Plus, a new firmware as well as a new driver just dropped. So let's talk about my whole overall experience with the Claw right here, and if the latest updates fixed some of the issues that were present from the start. Let's begin. Now, handhelds are not my primary gaming devices because I just prefer to play on a PC for various reasons, but I do use them because they're great for when you're traveling, they're great for when you need to take your kids to sports and you have an hour to kill, and they're just great when you're, for example, not feeling that well and you want to stay under a blanket and game for a bit in peace. So I do have the Nintendo Switch OLED. I instantly bought the Steam Deck when it launched, and I also got the OLED version of the Steam Deck a few months back. So while I never reviewed any handhelds on this channel, I do own a couple and I do use them every once in a while. And as I said at the start, for the past month or so, I've been using the Claw and I've been using the Steam Deck simultaneously. So I ended up with a list of things that I think MSI does better and a list of things that I think are holding the Claw back from replacing the Steam Deck completely. So let's start with the good stuff. I really like the design and the ergonomics of the Claw. It is a few grams heavier than the Steam Deck, but it doesn't really feel heavier. The size is pretty much the same and it has a pretty similar shape, but I do think the thumbstick that is positioned a bit more towards the outside feels more comfortable, and it just feels more natural to go between the thumbstick and the D-pad on the left and the buttons and the thumbstick on the right side. Now, of course, this will depend on your taste and what you are used to, but I personally kind of prefer this. I also really like the Hall effect thumbsticks and triggers. They feel great, they should last longer than the Steam Deck ones in theory, and they shouldn't have drift issues. So overall, the ergonomics of the Claw and how it feels in your hands are really good, in my opinion. Now, compatibility was the biggest thing that I was worried about before I started using the Claw, because the Arc GPU is relatively new, and when it launched, there were a lot of titles that didn't work at all or worked very poorly, but they've been slowly adding more and more titles, and the experience wasn't as bad, I would say, at least not for most of the games that I was playing. Some lighter or older games like Tony Hawk, like Cult of the Lamb, Dinkum and Skyrim worked perfectly fine without any effort, but newer titles and heavier titles like Horizon Forbidden West, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, like Helldivers 2 and Baldur's Gate 3 do require you to play around with the settings a bit to find which combination works best, which generally means putting it on either low or medium settings and using upscaling to the 1080p display. And most of these games were playing just fine, while others did have some issues, but I'm going to talk about that a bit later. Now, obviously, the 30-ish FPS you'll see in heavier titles isn't amazing if you're used to PC gaming, but it is playable, and then especially with the latest firmware and driver update. Now, another positive thing is the sound. I would say that both the speakers and the fan noise really stand out.
Perceptive for such an inferior creature. For you to keep sucking air, it is necessary for you to tell me something of worth.
So the original Steam Deck noise never really bothered me personally, but the OLED was an improvement, and then the Claw is noticeably quieter than both, even at its loudest setting. And when you combine that with good speakers, it really offers a great sounding experience overall. Now, obviously, you can also just use a headset if you prefer, but if you do play your handheld with speakers on, the Claw sounds better than the Steam Deck. I also like the display as well. It is a sharp and bright IPS display with 1080p resolution and 120 Hz refresh rate. Only when you're outside, for example, in the full sunlight, it does fall a bit short, I would say, but that goes for most other handhelds as well. I mean, you really want 1000 nits or more for that particular situation, and none of these devices do that. It also kind of feels like a fully functioning PC, and if you use a dock, either Thunderbolt or USB, you can actually use it as a regular PC. Now, that's not something that's really new or something that's really unique to the Claw, but I expect more people to be familiar with the Windows operating system than they are with Linux, for example, especially when it comes to some light work or when it comes to gaming. And then having a Windows handheld that instantly gives you access to other game launchers than Steam is quite nice. It lets you easily and without any big effort install Ubisoft Connect, Epic Games Launcher, the Xbox app, or anything else that you might need or might have in mind. And even though you can do all of that as well on a Steam Deck, it does require quite a bit of research and quite a few steps to get to the same point. So the Claw, I would say, is much easier and much more accessible in that regard. But herein lies the first downside of the Claw as well. The MSI software does an okay-ish job at giving you access to settings, updates, and launching your games easily, but the Steam Deck software is just way more mature and way far ahead when it comes to smoothness and just the amount of options and overlays you have built in. And the part of this is not just MSI's fault directly as much as it is what Windows and many of its apps are. And you can just instantly notice that the Steam Deck operating system is built around a handheld, while Windows and most of its apps don't feel like they were made for a device like this one, because they weren't. Just navigating the different game launchers can be a bit rough at times, and I actually ended up switching between the desktop and the gamepad mode a lot when I was using the Claw outside of games, because it was just easier to do it like that. And then the on-screen keyboard, for example, was not appearing every time I needed it to appear, so I actually ended up connecting a mouse and a keyboard a couple of times just to install everything and just to set the Claw up to my liking before going full handheld mode. So it just feels like it's in its experimental phase and more like a beta product than the Steam Deck does. But that being said, Steam Deck has been around for 2 years or so, and we are a lot of firmware updates and a lot of driver updates and a whole new device further than the MSI Claw. And on top of that, the AMD drivers for the Steam Deck feel more mature than the Intel drivers for the Claw, because they are. So on the Deck, once you find a setting that you are happy with in some of those heavier titles, the performance would be generally pretty consistent. But with the Claw, for example, I ran into pretty frequent drops and stutters in quite a few games that just didn't happen with the Deck. And the latest firmware and BIOS update did improve things in some games, but it's still happening in other titles. Horizon Forbidden West, for example, is considerably smoother than it was before. The 1% lows went from below 10 to around 20, and before it would stutter every 30 seconds or so, while now it only does it once when going from one large area to another. So there's still room for improvement, but it is much better than it was before, and the same goes for Assassin's Creed Valhalla. But Baldur's Gate 3, for example, still gets these long stutters frequently, which is fine in a turn-based game like this one. But in Starfield, for example, it gets really annoying really quickly, and it makes the game unplayable, especially when it happens a lot during combat. And then there are games that just don't run well at all. Cyberpunk 2077, for example, even with every setting turned all the way down, is simply unplayable. It does have small periods here and there when it is running smoothly and reporting 30 FPS, but most of the time it's just constantly stuttering and constantly freezing. And that's with the latest updates as well. So MSI and Intel still have some work to do on the Claw and the Arc drivers in general. And honestly, I thought the battery life was a bit disappointing as well. So at CES, MSI was really focusing a lot on how the Claw has a big 53 watt-hour battery, suggesting that it would last longer than other handhelds. but in reality, it lasted about the same as a Steam Deck OLED while playing heavier AAA games. It lasted about 2, maybe 2.5 hours, and if you're outside with the brightness all the way up, it will run out in an hour and a half. But in lighter games, the Steam Deck actually ran more efficiently. So Valve mentions 8 hours, but I can get 5 to 6 hours without too much of an effort while running some lighter games that are limited to 30 or 45 FPS. But with the Claw, in the same situation, the best result I got was about 4 hours. So it's okay, but I was still disappointed because the battery life was a big talking point in their marketing before, and I just expected more. And lastly, I think MSI is behind when it comes to upgradability and repairability too. It's not that hard to open it up if you just want to clean it a bit, but if you want to add a larger SSD, for example, it will require you to remove and later repaste the CPU cooling, which is far from ideal. While on the Steam Deck, most parts are easily accessible. You can buy all the parts separately, and Valve even worked with iFixit to make sure there are tons of detailed step-by-step guides helping you replace every individual part. Now, the Claw is only just out, and it took a bit for the deck to get all these guides, but it is something you need to weigh in your decision and something that I think MSI needs to work towards as well. So I really like what MSI has done with the design of the Claw, with the speakers, with the fan tuning of the Claw, and I think it does show that there is definitely a potential for Intel Arc-based handhelds. Plus, it is also very nice to see that they already dropped several updates after a few weeks of its release that do improve some things. But even with the very latest BIOS and the latest driver, it still feels like the Claw is in its beta phase and that there's a lot more work to be done when it comes to stability and drivers, and then both from MSI and from Intel. Now, they've made some steps already, but it just needs more work. So it is really hard to just recommend buying a Claw right now. If you are an early adopter and you just want to experience something different, you can maybe give it a go. But for most regular users, I just feel it's too early and I feel it is too expensive. It is slowly going down in price, with the Core Ultra 5 model dropping from 830 to 700 euros. But a 1 terabyte Steam Deck OLED will still cost you less, and it is a more mature product. But keep in mind, the Steam Deck also took a while to get to where it is today. So it was getting constant updates from Valve, it was getting constant updates from AMD, and it really changed the overall experience over time. So when it comes to the Claw, it is really up to MSI and up to Intel to show the same amount of effort of pushing updates and improving the software and drivers constantly to iron out some of the bugs, to deal with those annoying frame drops in some games, and just to make the overall experience just nicer and proper, because it does have potential. It just needs some more work and it just needs some more time. That's it. This video was brought to you by Seasonic and their Vertex power supplies. These fully modular power supplies are extremely efficient and very quiet due to their fan design and their hybrid fan mode that stops the fans completely under 40% load. They come with a variety of connections for any kind of system you have in mind, including the 12-volt high-power cable for the latest NVIDIA graphics cards. And to wrap it all up, they now offer a nice and cozy 12-year-long warranty. Check them out using the links in the description below. That's all I had for today. Thank you so much for staying to the end of this video. If you liked it and you want to see more videos like this one, please do consider clicking that subscribe button. Bye guys, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!